This workshop will provide, as it's titled, an update on Compass 2020 Goal 3 and related strategies, as well as an update on progress on some of those strategies. So first, a reminder of Goal 3, which states that all students will benefit from an educational experience that fosters their social and emotional development. And what an outstanding example of that we just saw within the Green Run Innovation Program that blends both that academic and social emotional piece. We think of Compass 2020 setting that purpose for the entire school division, just to set some context about what we mean by social emotional learning. Social emotional learning generally refers to the skills and abilities that allow individuals to relate to others, set goals, manage emotions, and resolve conflicts. So while all strategies are being pursued in service of Goal 3, for this presentation, I'm going to share with you efforts specifically around Strategy 4. You'll notice that Strategy 4 calls out 3 specific actions which involve working to build capacity in our schools in regard to the student response team process, the practice of mediation, and the implementation of the PBIS framework. In this presentation, I'll outline the work that's been done to date in each of these 3 areas. As schools and central office teams collaborate in these areas, we're working to create a support or bridge the gap, if you will, to better meet student social and emotional needs. This presentation will look at each of these 3 areas and how they're currently being approached at the school level. Let's start with a look at the student response team process. So what is a student response team, you might be wondering? It's a proactive, systematic approach which uses interventions and strategies to continually monitor and track student progress over time. Students may be referred when they're experiencing academic or behavioral difficulties. Adjustments are made by the team to instructional or behavioral programs for students to ensure their success. The process leverages universal screenings and progress monitoring. The process involves the implementation of a multi-tiered system, as you can see on the screen, which provides a framework for differentiated, high-quality instruction. Student response team membership may vary depending on the issue at hand and typically consists of the parent, a school administrator, teachers, the school counselor, and other related staff, such as a social worker or psychologist. Students may also be included in the process depending on maturation and the issue at hand. To ensure a consistent, structured implementation of student response teams, all schools were asked during the 16-17 school year to move from a student support team model to a student response model. The biggest difference here is that the support team model was often a reactive process, while the student response process is proactive and focuses on Tier 1 interventions in all classrooms, and then through the student response team leverages Tier 2 and 3 interventions in response to students' needs and monitors progress, reconvening to discuss progressive interventions as needed. Again, this school year, through our strategic action agenda, all schools who had not fully implemented were asked to come fully on board, of course with great support from the central level. Part of relationship building, as is done with student response teams, is recognizing when students need help de-escalating and implementing strategies to help them resolve conflicts, and to modify behaviors before they rise to the level of a larger discipline issue. In some instances, mediation is one strategy that can be used. This year's strategic action agenda includes a commitment to building a stronger understanding of the mediation process and how to leverage the process, when appropriate, to resolve conflicts between teachers and students. The Department of Teaching and Learning, in partnership with staff from the Student Leadership Office, offered professional learning this summer for school counselors and other select staff. We also provided a mediation overview session for all administrators this fall. An important component of that training was explaining what mediation is and why we would use it in our schools. As noted on the slide, mediation is a flexible process which can be used proactively and reactively. A teacher may request mediation when he or she notes a situation has the potential to escalate in an attempt to restore or build a stronger relationship between the student and the teacher. Or mediation may be requested in conjunction with a discipline incident in order to get to the root of the cause of a related conflict and ensure lasting resolution. Mediation exists and has for years within our discipline guidelines as a Level 3 intervention. Mediation is not simply a conference after an incident or a conflict. Mediation is actually a structured process to be conducted by a trained mediator. It is not appropriate for all situations. While it's a highly flexible process, it works best when both parties are willing participants and are open to the process. In fact, some have mistakenly had the perception that mediation is to be used instead of other disciplinary consequences. While mediation certainly may be used before discipline occurs or after a discipline incident occurs, it is not intended to be used in place of other consequences for specific infractions as outlined in the VVCPS discipline guidelines and our student code of conduct. At a recent citywide principals meeting, an overview on the process of mediation was provided, and this allowed administrators time to examine scenarios and determine whether mediation may or may not be an effective strategy to use in the given scenario. Principals were then asked to reflect on their learning and understanding as a result of the session. On the screen, please note some of their reflections. So as you can see, as a result of the training, this really helped our school teams to be able to leverage a practice that had always been listed, but they may not have known when to appropriately use it or how to appropriately use it. While all of our schools are using the student response team process and are exploring mediation practices to meet student needs, we also have a number of schools working on implementing the PBIS framework. You may recall that last school year we had 19 schools serving as PBIS schools. These original PBIS schools began the work over the course of the past few years through grant funding that was made available to the division. This school year, the division brought a new cohort of 19 schools on board to PBIS. Designated staff from the Office of Psychological Services have also joined the PBIS team, serving as PBIS coaches to support all of our PBIS schools who are continuing the journey and are also new to the PBIS journey. So what is the work that PBIS schools are engaging in? Well, PBIS, which is, by the way, known as many acronyms, you may hear PBIS, MTSS, or VTSS, depending on the origin of the work, but they're all referring to the same framework. So PBIS is not an intervention or a strategy. It's a framework that provides a structure for schools to develop a culture and behavioral supports to meet the needs of all students. Since many of our schools are deeply involved in this work, rather than you hearing from me regarding PBIS, I wanted you to have an opportunity to hear directly from our schools and bring some of their voices and perspectives regarding PBIS to you this evening. So let's hear how some of our PBIS schools define the PBIS framework.
Well, I think PBIS is a method to look at discipline in a different kind of way. We definitely still incorporate the negative consequences as far as
that they shouldn't be doing. Unfortunately, there will have to be an A or a B. But the aspect of PBIS that I think is new that we introduced to Virginia Beach is the idea of teaching positive behavior as well. So when a student does something well, we acknowledge it, because essentially the definition of discipline is to teach, but we don't want to just teach poor behaviors, we want to teach positive ones.
So PBIS, I think it gets kind of a bad rap. I think a lot of people think that PBIS is just about incentives. It's about something flashy. It's about things that are tangible, having a great reward or having like raffle tickets or acknowledging behavior. I think a lot of people assume that it is ignoring discipline and is actually just in fact about, some fluffy acknowledgement system like caught you being good. But at its core, it's a lot deeper than that. PBIS is Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. It's kind of another acronym in the alphabet soup of education, but it has a lot of meaning. At its core, essentially, PBIS is about having expectations created by the faculty and by students and by community, and having these expectations enforced consistently in a building, having them explicitly taught, and having consistent and very well-defined consequences for when you meet those expectations and when you don't meet those expectations.
to teachers, PBIS is not a canned program, but rather a common framework individualized to each school. It's a preventative and proactive approach to behavior. In speaking with staff at PBIS schools about their journey, they shared that there are often misconceptions or myths about PBIS that they've worked to dispel as they were implementing the framework. For example, one of those myths is that PBIS is a magic bullet of sorts, and upon implementation, discipline problems are immediately reduced. Let's hear from teachers in 2 of our PBIS schools who explain this misconception.
You know, PBIS is a process, and it does not happen overnight. This is our 3rd year. And I can say after 15 years of teaching that this was the first year, going in our 3rd year, that the start of school went so smooth. And I think really it's because those systems of support have been laid 2 years ago, and students know what the school-wide expectations are, the language, and it allowed for us as teachers to just dive right into teaching and learning a lot faster than spending time teaching rules, routines, procedures, and PBIS teaching these systems of support. There's a lot less disruption in the classroom, and we're able to facilitate a lot more teaching and learning than we would have in the past.
From the first year, it was kind of, it was implementing it. It was really weird to get that common language down for everybody to have it, because it's not what you're used to. But year 2, it got easier, and then coming into year 3, you don't even think twice about it now. So now it's just language that everyone in the building uses all day, every day.
So as you heard, full implementation takes time, and it can happen over multiple school years. This graphic shows that while PBIS is a structured approach, schools move at their own pace through the various stages. You can see our original schools, some of whom were at it for the 15-16 year also, have not reached the innovation and sustainability phase even at the end of last school year. And here are our 19 new schools. No matter the stage of implementation, for our conversations with staff who are currently implementing PBIS at any stage, they shared that it is definitely having an impact on their school culture and the relationships between students, teachers, and administrators. You'll hear more later in the presentation about the impact PBIS is having at all stages of implementation. But first, let's look at another one of those myths about PBIS. This one is the idea that PBIS is used in place of discipline practices and that students are not to be referred to the office. Now let's hear the reality from an administrator and a teacher who know firsthand that this myth is not true.
I can think of several teachers who, my first year here at Green Run, were very frustrated with some of the discipline that they were experiencing in their classroom. And I think that, sometimes PBIS has this, some skeptics might say that it is a way to, pat kids on the back and only reward positive behavior. But here at Green Run, we've done a lot more with PBIS. We've had a lot of teachers who have really begun to see how they can use those expectations for students in order to help manage the behaviors in the classroom in positive ways.
In terms of me as a teacher, it's completely revolutionized my classroom management and completely changed my classroom. I've always been a teacher who believes in having a positive, happy place where students have fun and where they want to be, but PBIS has really helped me formalize that type of a classroom. It's not just a silly jumping around place. It's very structured, but it's structured with positivity. My students come in and they're happy to be here because they know they're going to get that encouragement. They know they're going to get love. They know they're going to get that support. It's incredibly reduced any disciplinary incidences that I have. And whenever I do experience a disciplinary incident, by structuring it through this idea of we are teaching appropriate behaviors, it becomes a teachable moment, which is so much more lasting than just slapping discipline on a student. PBIS does not mean no discipline, but it does mean that you take the time to teach behaviors, and that is going to be more lasting with students, and it's going to be more impactful for a relationship between the student and the teacher or the student and administration.
So we've heard about some myths, but let's take a look at the impacts of PBIS. So why invest the time? Because PBIS really can help create safe and consistent environments for students and teachers. Let's hear from our schools about the impact PBIS has had. no matter which stage of implementation.
The relationships that we've had with our kids has always been great, because that's the forefront of our focus as teachers. But when we've taken PBIS and we've been able to implement those positive strategies, and what's been really nice about PBIS is they've given us a toolbox per se of these strategies to use throughout the entire building. And it's really helped with our kids feeling like they're safe, our kids feeling like they're loved. And, our kids recognize that we approach them in a positive aspect, and we praise their positive behaviors, and we praise the positive things that are happening with them. And it's encouraging them, and it's encouraging them to perform better, not only behaviorally, but it's really encouraging them to be more successful academically.
The social emotional piece, I think the biggest thing is that our kids feel connected. I think that especially for kids that may be having some difficulty in the home life, when they come to us, ultimately, it's allowing us an opportunity, a platform, a structured framework to really engage in some dialogue with our kids, really to get to know them a lot better, to have a better sense of understanding about the issues, the challenges that they're being presented at home, some of the impacts that some of that behavior may be, brought into our building, and it's allowing for our staff to be much more understanding about some of those needs, and it's allowing for our staff to be much more responsive.
So now here at Woodstock, talking about the Woodstock Way has become second nature. It's something our children expect us to talk about every day on the announcements, and they wonder what's going on when we don't talk about it on the announcements, like, why wasn't there a Woodstock Way goal today? Well, and then so our students are looking forward to hearing about the Woodstock Way and who is showing the Woodstock Way each day. It is such a part of our daily conversation that it's part of our learning targets, it's part of our morning announcements, it's part of our everyday conversation with students. And that has taken some time, but at the same time, we're starting to see that be very beneficial for all of our students.
So as you heard articulated in the accounts from both the teacher and the administrative perspective, PBIS is having an impact on their schools. So it's helping build relationships between staff and students, allowing students to feel connected and for teachers to be responsive and students to have very clear expectations around their behavior. As schools continue their PBIS journey, they are finding that the benefits and impact in their schools is showing in their data. Let's take a look at some data points from Corporate Landing Elementary Schools currently in the third year of their PBIS journey. Corporate Landing Elementary School has found that in their 2 years of implementation, negative behaviors resulting in referrals to the office have decreased. Furthermore, their academic data shows increases to the prior year. To wrap up this portion of the presentation about PBIS in our schools, I'd like to share some final thoughts from staff who articulated in their discussions with us countless examples of how PBIS not only assists them in meeting student social emotional needs in service of Compass 2020 Goal 3, but that the impacts of PBIS and that structure in preparing students for life beyond the K-12 experience have really been clearly evident.
What's been nice about it is that it's not just teachers, and it's just not the staff, and it's not the front desk, it's the parents. And so what's been nice about this is that, it's gone from just being in our school to going into our community. And so our parents are taking what we call the Woodstock Way, which is our matrix, about being safe, being responsible, and being respectful, and they're using it at home, So you'll hear our parents say, well, we asked our kid today, well, were you respectful? Were you responsible? What you did at home, was it safe? At the bus stop, was it safe? And so it's nice to see that it's permeated, into our community as well. And so now we have our parent support, and our parents have started to see the impact that it's had on their child as a whole, both academically and behaviorally.
Whether students are moving into the work world or they're going into a collegiate setting, there has to be accountability and responsibility. And we're providing our students the opportunity to acknowledge good behavior, to set standards. And the students hold the teachers to these standards too, which is really amazing. In my classroom, we have a couple different things that count for professionalism. And it's really funny to see that if I forget something, a student will, joke with me, but say, Ms. Eccles, hey, are you being professional? Are you being prepared? And it's great because we can chuckle about it, but I'm like, you're right, I need to adjust that, or you need to adjust that. So it's really created and sparked some great conversation that can be used outside of the high school classroom.
Presentation, you've heard how the division is leveraging the student response team process, the mediation practice, and all of our schools, and that we're beginning to implement PBIS across the division in support of Goal 3. So how might we know if we're measuring up to the task of fostering social and emotional development for students? One way is to reflect on some of the data sets within our climate survey. So as reported in the 2017 School Division Climate Survey, there's a high level of agreement among parents that Virginia Beach City Public Schools are safe and orderly places for learning, and that our teachers care about how their child does in school. Similarly, teachers agree that BBCPS staff want students to do well. Division-wide, our parents and students had high approval ratings for our discipline and school safety. 91% of students said they knew the consequences to their actions in school, and 97% of parents said their children know the consequences to their actions. In looking at staff responses, more than 2/3 of our staff members across the division reported the same, and 57% reported that the consequences for breaking the rules are the same for all students in their school. In comparison to the student and parent perception data, the teacher data is less favorable. That may be in part because we're asking staff to think about discipline differently. The data also point to why we must continue to implement structures like PBIS across all of our schools so that we can open dialogue around discipline and work towards ensuring consistency and understanding across student, parent, teacher, and administrator groups. As you heard firsthand from our PBIS schools, there are often misconceptions that arise. PBIS is a process, and it involves dialogue, conversation, and shared consensus around discipline expectations within a school. If we consider organizational change theory, we know that it might take 3 to 5 years to see change, and so we have the expectation that our discipline data may really begin to shift, like we saw in Corporate Landing Elementary School's example, over the next 2 to 3 years. In fact, on a previous slide, I showed you how at Corporate Landing Elementary School, the number of negative behaviors that were requiring office referrals declined while they saw an increase in academic data. Now let's also look at the Corporate Landing Elementary School climate survey data for the same items shown on the current slide for the division. You can see that the staff at Corporate Landing Elementary report much higher levels of agreement or strong agreement to the same statements around students knowing consequences for misbehaving, as well as consequences being the same for all students when breaking the rules. Recall that the division data points for the same items were 69% and 57% respectively. So clearly this work is important. It requires patience and persistence, and it's a multi-year process to get to full implementation. As the division continues with PBIS implementation, central staff are committed to working to ensure a clear message going forward that this work is designed to meet the social and emotional needs of students as stated in Goal 3, but it does not replace our student code of conduct and discipline guidelines, which continue to be in full effect. Now let's take a look at some division referral and suspension data. Here you can see the past 3 years. Our referral data has not changed much over time. Year to year, data shows that there were some drops in referrals, but it was not a significant drop. So in 2014, we had 28,959 referrals, and this past school year, we had 28,413, a decrease of less than 2%. The suspension data is similar as well. The intention is that the open dialogue as part of the SRT process, mediation when appropriate, and the implementation of the PBIS framework is that this will lay the foundation for some long-term changes, resulting in the reduction of student problem behaviors, which may in turn lead to fewer discipline referrals, and that the teaching of self-discipline and the focus on positive behavioral expectations will continue to foster the social and emotional needs of our students. Again, the key is to ultimately reduce the incidence of problem behaviors with students, and it's these behaviors which can disrupt learning and may ultimately result in discipline referrals. To end, I'd like to first provide the board a one-page document that has an overview of all the concepts we covered in the presentation and that are covered within the slides, in case that's something that may be handy for you. It does cover some of the information in the presentation. And I'd also especially like to thank the schools who shared their stories on camera for the board tonight. And I'd also like to recognize some staff from Student Support Services and other offices within the Department of Teaching and Learning who have been instrumental in both the SRT work, mediation work, and PBIS work. So if they could please be stand to be recognized. Dr. Lakeisha Parrott in the Office of Opportunity and Achievement, along with Bobby Jameson, have been working tirelessly on mediation along with the school counselors and administrators in our buildings. We also have Karen DiMaggio and some of our PBIS coaches who have been leading the charge with PBIS for the schools who have been on board and will continue to come on board. And remember, we have an awful lot of schools who have yet to even begin the PBIS work. So they're really working with our current schools and getting best practices and getting ready to support schools moving forward. And Adrian Day has been working to oversee the SRT process for our schools and support them in making sure that they have their teams up and running and have the support they need for the school year. So thank you to all of you for your work. So we will now, or I will take questions, or to ask specific questions of the team as well.
Any board members with questions? Ms. Melnick?
Okay, so I took away from this universal language, which is so important. So we've had 19 this year. So where will this go next year?
By 2020, everyone will be on board. So cohorts of about the same size need to come on board over the next 2 school years so that everyone can begin to engage in these conversations with the support of PBIS coaches, which are staff in our Office of Psychological Services who are able to dedicate some time to helping facilitate that work, because it does take some time in facilitation.
Ms. Manning?
So I studied positive behavioral interventions in college. I used it with my own sons. I saw pretty much every teacher my kids have ever had in Virginia Beach has used PBIS. Although I think it's labeled now. It wasn't necessarily labeled before. So I'm a huge advocate of positive behavioral reinforcement. I think it's extremely important. But I really think a lot of our teachers do that already. I'm not saying that there aren't teachers that don't, but I would like to give credit to those teachers because they really do. I've seen it firsthand numerous times. But what I think has been misunderstood, perhaps, because I've heard over and over that it wasn't the intention. From federal laws, state laws that have come down that says you must reduce referrals and suspensions. Right. Teachers and administrators have heard, okay, I can't refer. And I still think that's a big problem. And if that's the case, then we need to make it very clear to teachers that you can refer students and that you're going to be supported when you do refer students. Yes. So where are we with that in making sure that teachers know that they can?
2 points to what one is, you're right, a lot of teachers are using these strategies and they're great teaching practices. What the PBIS does is allow a school to develop a common language or matrix across the school so there's consistency from classroom to classroom. So the way teacher A is implementing that positive language might be a little different than teacher B. So we heard a great example of how once the school begins using some common language, and this is shared decision making, teachers have a voice in this and bring forward their best practices and determine what it may look like in the school. So absolutely, we recognize great examples, school to school, schools who aren't even engaged in PBIS where that's the focus. And then I would say, as I mentioned in the presentation, knowing that those misconceptions can arise, particularly not just to speak to the work of PBIS, as you mentioned, or mediation or SRT, but to other pressures or factors outside of the school division, we are committed as we move forward to making that message very clear. And so, when we look at that climate survey data and those staff responses that weren't as strong, that's a message to us that we need to make sure we have consistent language, and that's part of what PBIS and opening that dialogue across a whole faculty that involves the administration and involves teachers can help us get there. And so, Dr.
Well, I
Sachs,
think it's just
add to
important
that?
to add on to that couple of things. So one, I sent you all an update, I think at the beginning of the year, a video, a town hall that we did with teachers to really sort of tackle this question and talk about it. And so if you hadn't had the chance to see that and you'd like to see that, I'll make sure I send that link back to you. And that was shared with all staff across the division to sort of provide a consistent message about what the expectation is in terms of the discipline process. And really the key message there was that the discipline process is two rails of the same track, that there is a consequence side to that, but that can't be the only side to that there also has to be a teaching side to that. So that we can teach positive self-discipline, so that we can teach making better decisions, so that as students go down the road, they find themselves behaving more and more appropriately. I think the key message for us and from our perspective is that the more we do this work, we want to see a reduction in behaviors, which will ultimately lead to a reduction in referrals. So it's not reduce referrals by not referring, it's reduce behaviors, which down the road ought to lead to a reduction in referrals. And then I think the last piece of that, as you get questions about this in the community, is just go back to that data slide that says, well, I mean, I hear you, except that the referral numbers haven't changed. They just haven't changed over time. And so what's happening might be isolated to a particular school or to a particular administrator and teacher. And so then, as we talked about last time, just referring them back to the administration and saying, okay, let's have some dialogue about that at the administrative level. And if they're not satisfied with what they're hearing at the school level, to then take it to the Office of School Leadership to have some dialogue around that, so that if we have the specifics of where that's isolated, we can go and have a conversation with the leadership at that school to make sure we're reinforcing the message that we've communicated at the division level. Because, I mean, I have to suspect it's got to be an isolated thing, because the data just doesn't bear out that referrals have dropped dramatically. They just haven't. And so I would definitely encourage, if you're hearing that, Ms. Manning in particular, based on your question, send them back to the school, or if you know a particular school that a teacher's at and you want to just talk to us about that, we can go back and we can talk to the leadership at that school and try to understand what's happening there and make sure that it's very clear in the building what our expectations are in terms of the process.
Well, it's not just what I'm hearing, it's the teacher climate surveys as well indicated that. So I think it's way more than just what I'm hearing.
Well, I don't know that the climate survey specifically indicated that they don't know that they can refer. I think the lowest data from the teachers was that they're not sure students understand the consequences. And I mean, I would posit it's just a matter of us being in the process of having these conversations that may have caused some confusion. And so we have tried, as I said, the video we sent out, and then the conversations that we're having through this kind of ongoing effort to implement PBIS, I think will over time have a positive impact on that.
Ms. Weems?
Yeah, I do agree that a lot of it has to do with how the leader of the building, when they talk to their teachers and everything, that it comes from the administrators and principals. So we want to make sure that that's consistent. PBIS is, like I parent and like I coach, at the collegiate level. But I'm just kind of wondering, and maybe I've been just extra lucky. I've had my kids in school for 32 straight years without a break, and my grandchild. But I'm thinking they're doing this, anyway. I mean, and my other thing is, are they not teaching this at the collegiate level, at the college level, or is this like a?
Well,
are they not teaching this?
I would say one thing about the fact that PBIS kind of is happening anyway. Some of the strategies within PBIS are happening around positive classroom management. So a teacher may learn in their prep program how to set up a behavioral system that's focused on positive with rewarding that and setting up consequences. But that larger PBIS framework puts some processes in that are school-wide and are agreed upon across the school. For example, there's a very heavy emphasis on data. There's a PBIS team that looks at where are instances happening within the building, and are there particular time frames? For example, a building may notice, at a particular high school, their PBIS team may be looking at that and saying, we're getting a large number of office referrals between this time and this time on this hallway. There's an unsupervised bathroom here. What can we do to help create a situation so there are less problem behaviors there? So it's a little bit more than just practice teacher to teacher. It's kind of mobilizing a structure that the whole school can use and putting a team in place to monitor that and ensuring some commonality, again, from classroom to classroom across the school, and then setting up expectations really in a clear way that even parents can understand. And it helps, throughout that entire experience. We heard a great example, I think, from Woodstock, or actually it was Salem Elementary, where she said the start of the school year was smoother because the kids began to get used to that language. And then one of the Woodstock teachers was sharing, the parents can say when their behavior things at home they're using, are we respectful? Are we safe? Knowing that Woodstock way and that language and latching on to that. So I think, yes, positive behavior classroom incentive programs are absolutely something our teachers typically come with a good understanding of, and then that really helps when they begin the work as a school. So.
And so I can understand how, of course, the SRT is a great tier process for academic success, and the PBIS. So those are kind of like embedded. But with this mediation, are we using mediators within our own school system? Because years ago, actually, one of my kids had a mediator, and they came from Richmond. And I was like, why are we paying somebody from Richmond to come and mediate this? And so and when does that take place? Does it take place in instructional time? Is it a one-time thing? Is it a 3 or 4? Are we bringing mediators in from different cities?
No, these would be our own staff. So typically the school counselor within the building would be the person conducting the mediation. It could be there are other staff that have been trained in the building. So it's leveraging your own support staff within a school.
Okay,
and so as to the number of times it might take place, it would depend on the instance. And again, mediation's been used. It's been part of, as I said, our code of conduct. And what we found is it's a really powerful practice. And you might recall on the Student Discipline Task Force, when they did their work, one of their recommendations was to make sure we were leveraging mediation appropriately in our schools. And so while it was listed there, we found school to school, they didn't really know how to mobilize that, or they didn't have the training to pull it off. And they weren't sure specifically how they might leverage that practice when a student and teacher relationship needed repair. So there was a discipline instance in class, a student might be suspended out of class, but then they're going to return. And so when the student returns, would mediation be appropriate? It would depend on the circumstance between the student and teacher, for example, to help repair that relationship and set them up for success upon a student's return. It might be student-to-student mediation, which has typically been more common over the years. Our school counselors have been well equipped to deal with that.
And are the parents notified that their child is going through this mediation, and are they invited to participate if appropriate?
I mean, if it were appropriate, I'm sure there could be a situation where they were involved in the mediation, but they're absolutely made aware, just as they would be if a child was referred to the office or a counselor for anything else. Our counselors do make contact.
Ms. Holtz?
Thank you.
It would be helpful to me if you gave more examples of how the teams are used, but you actually did give one a minute ago about trouble in a particular spot. But what I was thinking of, say in middle school, 2 kids had a fist fight. Well, we know that there's discipline already in place for that.
Right.
But say a child was being bullied, and that could lead to an altercation. If that child went up and spoke to the teacher, would the team come into play? Would you have a student response team to mediate that, or how would you handle that?
Well, student response teams can be used for a number of reasons. A child might be having academic difficulty, behavior difficulty. It might stem from peer relations, where a teacher or a parent might make the referral, and that team would work on putting strategies or interventions into place. Mediation might be one of those strategies, but it might operate separately without ever having enacted a student response team. It might be that there are 2 students who Like you gave a fist fight example, they've had that, they've had their consequences in the office, they've been disciplined, but the administration might note that there's an ongoing feud here, and there might be an opportunity, if parties are willing, both parties are willing, to engage in mediation with the school counselor, for example, to help, again, restore and repair the relationship, to hopefully get to the bottom of it so that there's not a repeat incident. So it's having the folks who are involved with our students, whether it's the teacher, whether it's the school administrator who's doling out the discipline or dealing with the referrals, to have them look at those scenarios and situations and say, is this a situation where mediation could help restore a relationship, could help get to the root cause of a problem, that there's clearly something else. Oftentimes students may act out in class, there's a referral, they're in the office, but it's clear there's something underlying that may be more than meets the eye. Mediation's one way to get to that. So it really is situational, and that's a lot of what we did in the training with our administrators and counselors, was talking through when does it make sense and when does it clearly not make sense and when is it not appropriate.
Ms. Riggs?
So I would think that, when the Woodstock teacher was talking, she was talking about the parent saying, they're using some of the same language. And I know when I went to the, what do you call it, your expo you had at, down at the convention center.
The Navigating the Journey.
Yeah, one of the areas that you had of interest was the PBIS and the people back there. So how much, and I know probably Parent Connection, how much of this is being shared with parents in ways that they can do this at their own, in home? Because I think that's where we're seeing a lot of problems this day and time, is parents not knowing how to work with their own children and knowing how to use that. I know we can't call the shots on the homes, but how much of it are they sharing this, like at the PTA open houses?
For
How much?
schools engaged in PBIS, they have a plan for parent or community engagement. And so it may look like letters, it may be kickoff assemblies at back to school night or open house. There may be a video introduction to parents about what their school-wide matrices is. So certainly for those schools, yes. But remember, we have a lot of schools not on board yet. So we are trying to make sure that we're dispelling some misconceptions, there to answer questions, and that's one reason we opted to have that featured at our Navigating the Journey night. But yeah, this is about the community and parents as well. So the schools that are engaged in the work absolutely have a plan for what will meet their parent needs.
Thank you, Dr. Caswell. This has been extremely informative.
Yes, thank you, very good.
Ms. Rye, and then we need to be mindful of the time.
Thank you. Quickly, yes, the role of counselors, I just wanted to trace back to Dr. Robertson and his department and their recommendation when the report was presented a few months ago for more counseling support in terms of staffing, which I fully support, and this is one of the reasons, so that our counselors can do actual counseling and mediation, and it all sounds great.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Caswell. Okay, we are in recess at this point until 6 o'clock from the dais.